Billionaire forced his maid to leave while pregnant. 5 years later, her son stands before him in tears. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer struck 11:30 p.m. as Damien Whitmore descended the spiral staircase of his Manhattan penthouse. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floors with mechanical precision, each step echoing through the cavernous space like a metronome counting down the hours until dawn. At 39, Damien had built his empire with the same methodical approach he used to navigate his empty home. Whitmore Enterprises owned 47 luxury hotels across the United States, each one a testament to his unwavering belief that success required sacrifice. Specifically, the sacrifice of anything that could make him vulnerable. He paused at the kitchen threshold, loosening his charcoal tie. The day's board meeting had run until 10, followed by a conference call with investors in Tokyo. Tomorrow would bring another series of acquisitions, another expansion into untapped markets. The rhythm never stopped, and that's exactly how he preferred it. But tonight something was different. A soft humming drifted from the kitchen, a melody he didn't recognize, gentle and almost hypnotic. Damien stepped closer, his businessman's instinct telling him to announce his presence, to maintain the professional distance he kept with all his staff. Instead, he found himself frozen in the doorway. Maeve Hollis stood at the granite island, her back turned to him as she wiped down the surfaces with careful, deliberate movements. Her honey-colored hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard black uniform issued to all night cleaning staff. But there was something about the way she moved, unhurried, almost graceful, that made Damien's chest tighten unexpectedly. She had been working the night shift for 8 months, arriving at 10 p.m. and leaving before sunrise. He had noticed her, of course. Damien noticed everything, but he had never spoken to her beyond a curt nod when their paths crossed in the hallway. Maeve turned slightly, adjusting her wireless earbuds, and caught sight of him in her peripheral vision. She startled, pulling out one earbud. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I didn't hear you come down." "Don't let me interrupt your work," he replied, stepping into the kitchen with his usual authoritative tone. But something in her expression, not fear exactly, but a kind of quiet wariness, made him pause. She nodded and turned back to her cleaning, but the humming had stopped. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Damien found himself studying the curve of her neck, the way her shoulders tensed slightly under his gaze. "What were you listening to?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Maeve glanced back at him, surprise flickering across her features. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of silver that seemed to shift in the kitchen's ambient lighting. "Oh, just music," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Helps pass the time. Classical? Jazz?" He moved closer to the island, watching her hands as she folded the cleaning cloth with meticulous care. "Actually, it was Billie Holiday. Strange Fruit." She met his eyes for a moment before looking away. "Not exactly typical cleaning music, I suppose." Damien felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he couldn't quite name. "You have interesting taste. My grandmother used to play it." Maeve's voice grew softer. She said some songs carry the weight of the world, and if you're going to listen, you better be ready to feel it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, charged with an electricity Damien hadn't experienced in years. He watched as Maeve's fingers traced the edge of the granite countertop, a nervous habit that somehow humanized her in his eyes. "I should let you finish," he said finally, though he made no move to leave. "It's okay," she replied, then added more quietly, "It gets lonely in these big spaces at night." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Damien studied her face, noting the way she seemed to regret the words the moment they left her lips. "Yes," he said simply, "it does." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared solitude, of two people who had learned to navigate emptiness in their own ways. Maeve's cheeks flushed slightly, and she turned back to her work with renewed focus. Damien remained in the kitchen for another 10 minutes, making unnecessary coffee he wouldn't drink, reorganizing mail he had already sorted. All the while, he was acutely aware of her presence, of the way she moved through his space with quiet respect, of how the massive penthouse felt less cavernous with her in it. When he finally retreated to his study, closing the door behind him with a soft click, Damien found himself unable to concentrate on the quarterly report spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he kept thinking about storm gray eyes and the gentle sadness in her voice when she spoke about loneliness. Outside his windows, Manhattan glittered like a jewelry box, millions of lives playing out in illuminated rectangles across the cityscape. But for the first time in years, Damien wasn't thinking about conquest or expansion or the next deal that would cement his legacy. He was thinking about a woman who listened to Billie Holiday while cleaning his kitchen, and wondering what other secrets she carried in the quiet spaces between her words. But some secrets, once awakened, refused to stay buried. 3 weeks passed before Damien found himself in the kitchen again at midnight. Though he told himself it was purely coincidental, the truth was more complicated. He had been staying later at the office, taking longer routes through his penthouse, all in the hopes of another accidental encounter. Tonight, Maeve was organizing the contents of his refrigerator, arranging the barely touched takeout containers and expensive bottles of water with the same care she applied to everything else. She had her earbuds in again, but when she sensed his presence, she turned with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, pulling out one earbud. "Another late night?" "Board meeting ran long," he replied, though the meeting had ended 2 hours ago. He had spent the time in his study, pretending to review contracts while listening for the soft sounds of her movement through the house. "I made fresh coffee," she offered, gesturing to the machine on the counter. "I hope that's okay. The nights get long and I thought—" "You thought correctly." Damien moved to the cabinet, retrieving 2 mugs instead of 1. The gesture surprised them both. Maeve accepted the coffee with careful fingers, ensuring their hands didn't touch as she took the ceramic mug. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the granite expanse between them feeling both like a barrier and a bridge. "What are you listening to tonight?" Damien asked, settling onto one of the bar stools. The informality of the position felt foreign to him. He was a man who conducted business from behind mahogany desks and conference room tables. "Nina Simone," Maeve replied, her voice warming slightly. "My grandmother had quite the collection. Said music was the only honest thing left in the world." "Your grandmother raised you?" The question slipped out before Damien could consider its appropriateness. He watched Maeve's expression shift, becoming more guarded. "From the time I was 12, she said carefully. "My parents, well, they weren't really equipped for the job." Damien found himself leaning forward slightly. "That must have been difficult." Maeve's laugh held no humor. "Grammy used to say that some people collect heartbreak like souvenirs, but the smart ones learn to travel light." She took a sip of coffee, using the moment to compose herself. She was right mostly. "Mostly? Well, some heartbreak is worth carrying," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before looking away. "The kind that teaches you who you really are." The words settled between them with uncomfortable intimacy. Damien found himself studying her profile as she gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. There was something about her stillness that drew him in, a quality he rarely encountered in his world of aggressive negotiations and calculated moves. "What about you?" Maeve asked suddenly. "Family?" "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "None worth mentioning." She nodded, as if she understood the weight of that statement. "Sometimes the families we don't have shape us more than the ones we do." Damien felt something unlock in his chest, a sensation he couldn't name and didn't particularly want to examine. "You're very philosophical for a cleaning lady?" Maeve's tone carried no offense, just gentle amusement. "I was going to say for someone working the night shift." "Community college," she explained with a slight shrug. 2 years before I had to drop out. Turns out philosophy major doesn't pay the bills. "What would you have studied if money weren't an issue?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for so long that Damien wondered if she would answer at all. "Psychology, maybe. Social work." Her voice grew softer. "I've always been interested in what makes people survivable. The ways we learn to carry our damage without letting it destroy us. And have you figured that out?" Maeve looked at him directly then, and Damien felt the full impact of those storm gray eyes. "I think we all figure out our own version," she said. "Some people build walls, others build bridges. The lucky ones learn the difference." The observation hit closer to home than Damien cared to admit. He had built an empire on walls, financial, emotional, physical barriers that kept the world at a safe distance. But sitting in his kitchen at midnight, sharing coffee with a woman who spoke about heartbreak like poetry, those walls felt less like protection and more like prison bars. "I should let you get back to work," he said, though neither of them moved. I should get back to work, she agreed, but her hands remained wrapped around the coffee mug. They sat in comfortable silence for another few minutes, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the windows. Damien found himself memorizing details he had no business noticing. The way Maeve tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the small scar on her left hand, the way she held her coffee like she was warming herself from the inside out. When she finally stood to resume her cleaning, Damien felt the loss of her presence like a physical ache. Maeve, he called softly as she moved toward the living room. She turned back, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you for the coffee. Her smile was small but genuine. Thank you for the company. As she disappeared into the next room, Damien remained at the kitchen island, staring into the dregs of his coffee cup. He told himself this was harmless. Two people sharing a brief conversation in the small hours of the night. Nothing more than common courtesy between employer and employee. But as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom an hour later, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the carefully constructed order of his world. And the most dangerous part wasn't that it was happening. It was that he didn't want it to stop. The rain drummed against the penthouse windows with relentless intensity, turning Manhattan into a blur of neon and shadows. Damien stood in his home office, phone pressed to his ear as he listened to his Seattle hotel manager explain why occupancy rates had dropped 15% in the past month. Sir, the competing chain opened right across the street, the manager's voice crackled through the speaker. They're offering rates we simply can't match without— Then don't match them, Damien interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. Find another way, improve the experience, add value. That's what separates us from the discount chains. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, each problem requiring solutions that felt increasingly distant from the empire he had so carefully constructed. When he finally hung up, Damien realized his hands were trembling slightly, not from stress but from the anticipation that had been building all week. It was Thursday. Maeve would arrive in an hour. Their midnight conversations had become a routine neither of them acknowledged directly. She would find him in the kitchen or study. They would share coffee and careful words, and something electric would pulse in the space between them. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the storm outside seemed to mirror the restlessness inside his chest. At 11:15, Damien heard the soft chime of the service elevator. He forced himself to remain in his office for exactly 15 minutes before making his way to the kitchen, carrying a stack of contracts he had no intention of reviewing. Maeve was there, as always, but something in her posture seemed different. She stood at the sink with her back to him, shoulders rigid, one hand gripping the edge of the counter. Her usual earbuds were nowhere to be seen. Maeve? His voice came out softer than intended. She turned, and he saw immediately that she had been crying. The tears were gone now, but her eyes held a raw vulnerability that made his chest tighten. I'm sorry, she said quickly, wiping at her cheeks. I know I probably look— What happened? The question cut through her attempt at composure. For a moment she looked like she might deflect, maintain the professional distance they had been pretending to preserve. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. My landlord raised the rent, she said quietly. Again. Third time this year. I've been looking for something cheaper, but everything decent requires a deposit I don't have, and the places I can afford— She trailed off, shaking her head. I'm sorry. This isn't your problem. Damien set the contracts on the counter and moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes. How much? He asked. Mr. Whitmore, I can't— How much do you need? Maeve's laugh held no humor. More than I can ask for. More than would be appropriate between— She gestured vaguely between them. Between us. The word us hung in the air like a confession. Damien felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of what they had been dancing around for weeks. There is no appropriate between us anymore, he said quietly. Is there? The admission seemed to steal the air from the room. Maeve's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she took a small step forward, and he found himself mirroring the movement. This is a mistake, she whispered. But she didn't step away. Probably, he agreed, his voice rough. They were close enough now that he could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, like vanilla and rain, close enough to see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. I should go, she said, but her feet remained planted. Yes, he said. You should. Instead, she reached up and touched his cheek with careful fingers, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. The simple contact sent electricity through his entire body. Damien, she breathed, using his first name for the first time. He closed his eyes at the sound of it on her lips, then covered her hand with his own. Maeve. When he opened his eyes, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Want and fear and something deeper, more dangerous. If we do this, she said quietly, everything changes. Everything already has changed. The truth of it settled between them like a challenge. Damien had built his life on control, on keeping emotion at arm's length. But standing here in his kitchen with rain lashing the windows and Maeve's hand warm against his face, control felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Slowly, carefully, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative as if they were both testing the reality of what was happening. Then Maeve's free hand fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like drowning and salvation all at once. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered against her lips. Don't go home tonight. Maeve's eyes searched his face, looking for something he wasn't sure he could give her. What are we doing, Damien? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I don't want you to leave. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her weighing the decision, calculating risks he couldn't begin to imagine. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said simply. I'll stay. Relief flooded through him so intensely it was almost painful. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and led her toward the stairs. Each step felt momentous, like crossing a bridge he couldn't uncross. At the threshold of his bedroom, Maeve paused. Are you sure? She asked, and he could hear the vulnerability in her voice. In response, he lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I've never been sure of anything in my life, he said honestly, but I'm sure of this. As the storm raged outside, they crossed the final line between employer and employee, between strangers sharing midnight coffee and something infinitely more dangerous. But some lines once crossed lead to territories from which there is no safe return. The morning after felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Damien woke to find Maeve already gone, the only evidence of her presence a faint indentation in the pillow beside him, and the lingering scent of vanilla in the air. For a moment, he wondered if he had dreamed it all. The storm, the kiss, the way she had whispered his name in the dark. But when he descended to the kitchen at 7 a.m., there was a fresh pot of coffee waiting, and a small note written on the back of a grocery receipt. Thank you for last night. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his wallet, though he couldn't explain why. The next 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of stolen moments and professional pretense. During the day, Damien threw himself into work with renewed intensity, closing a major acquisition in Miami and finalizing plans for a new hotel in Denver. But his thoughts kept drifting to 10 p.m., when his world would shift from the harsh angles of business to the soft curves of possibility. Maeve continued to arrive punctually each night, her black uniform and professional demeanor intact. But now there were coded exchanges, a brush of fingers when she handed him coffee, a meaningful look across the kitchen island, whispered conversations that led to kisses in darkened hallways. They established unspoken rules. No acknowledgement during the day if their paths crossed. No personal items left behind. No promises about tomorrow. It was a relationship built on shadows and silence, which should have felt fragile, but somehow felt more real than anything Damien had ever experienced. On a Wednesday evening in late October, he found Maeve in his study, dusting the leather-bound books he never read. She wore her hair down tonight, a cascade of honey-colored waves that caught the lamplight. You're early, she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence. Meeting ended sooner than expected. He moved to his desk, pretending to review emails while watching her work. How was your day? It was such a normal question, the kind couples asked each other over dinner. But they weren't a couple, were they? They were something unnamed, something that existed only in the space between midnight and dawn. Quiet, she replied, moving to dust the windowsill. I had a job interview this morning. Damien's fingers stilled on his keyboard. Oh? Administrative position at a medical office in Queens. Better hours, better pay. She paused in her dusting. More conventional. The implication hung between them. A day job would mean the end of this, whatever this was. The thought created a hollow ache in Damien's chest that he couldn't quite name. Do you want it? He asked carefully. Maeve turned to face him then, and he saw uncertainty in her storm-gray eyes. I don't know what I want anymore. The admission was barely above a whisper, but it hit him like a physical blow. He stood and crossed to where she stood by the window, close enough to see the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "Maeve," he said softly, reaching for her hand. She intertwined their fingers, holding on like he was an anchor in rough seas. "This can't last, can it? What we're doing?" The question he had been avoiding for weeks now demanded an answer. Damien looked into her eyes and felt something crack inside his chest. A carefully constructed wall he had spent decades building. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I don't want it to end." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. What would that look like if it didn't end? It was a fair question, and one he had no answer for. His world was board meetings and five-star restaurants, private jets and charity galas where appearance mattered more than substance. Her world was night shifts and community college dreams, bus rides and grocery store coffee. The gulf between them felt infinite. "I don't know," he repeated, but this time he cupped her face in his hands. "All I know is that before you, I felt like I was living my life underwater, everything muffled and distant and gray. And now I can breathe." The words surprised him with their honesty. Maeve's eyes filled with tears and she pressed her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't have. Of letting myself believe in fairy tales." Her voice broke slightly. "Of falling in love with someone who lives in a different world." The word love hung between them like a confession neither was ready to make. Damien felt his heart racing, felt the careful control he prized so highly slipping away. "Maeve," he started, but she silenced him with a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope in equal measure. They made love that night with an urgency that felt like goodbye, though neither of them said the words. Afterward, as they lay tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets, Damien traced patterns on her bare shoulder and tried to memorize the weight of her against his side. "I got the job," she said quietly into the darkness. His hand stilled. "Congratulations. I start Monday. 4 days." They had 4 more nights, and then this careful construction of stolen moments would crumble into memory. "We could still see each other," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how impossible it sounded. Maeve turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the city lights streaming through the windows. "How? When? I'd be just another woman in your life, calling and texting and hoping for scraps of your attention between board meetings." The picture she painted made him wince because of how accurate it felt. It wouldn't be like that, wouldn't it? Her smile was sad but not bitter. "You're Damien Whitmore. You own hotels in 12 states. I clean bathrooms for a living. How long before you remember that?" He wanted to argue, to tell her that none of that mattered, but the words stuck in his throat because he couldn't quite bring himself to believe them. "So this is it?" he asked. Maeve pressed a soft kiss to his chest right above his heart. "Some things are beautiful because they don't last forever, but sometimes the most beautiful things leave the deepest scars." Maeve stared at the plastic stick in her trembling hands, willing the 2 pink lines to disappear. The fluorescent light in the tiny bathroom of the Queen's medical office buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel surreal and too bright. 3 weeks had passed since her last night at the penthouse. 3 weeks of trying to forget the way Damien's hands felt against her skin, the way he whispered her name in the dark, the way her heart had shattered when she walked away from the only man who had ever made her feel truly seen. The new job was exactly what she had hoped for. Steady hours, decent pay, co-workers who treated her with respect rather than indifference. Dr. Henley, the pediatrician who ran the practice, was kind and patient, always taking time to explain procedures and asking about her weekend plans. It was the life she had been working toward for years. So why did everything feel hollow? She knew the answer, of course. It lived in the space between her ribs, a constant ache that no amount of professional success could fill. She missed him with an intensity that surprised her, not just the physical intimacy but the conversations, the way he listened like her words mattered, the rare moments when his carefully constructed facade would slip, and she would catch glimpses of the man beneath the empire. And now this. Maeve sank onto the closed toilet seat, still clutching the pregnancy test. 6 weeks. The timing aligned perfectly with those final nights at the penthouse, when they had made love with the desperate intensity of people saying goodbye. A soft knock on the bathroom door made her jump. "Maeve, you okay in there?" It was Carla, one of the nurses, her voice warm with concern. "Fine," Maeve called back, quickly shoving the test into her purse. "Just a minute." She splashed cold water on her face and studied her reflection in the mirror. Same honey-colored hair, same storm gray eyes, same freckles across her nose. But something fundamental had shifted in the past 5 minutes. She was going to be a mother. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of patient files and insurance forms. Maeve went through the motions automatically, her mind spinning with calculations and possibilities. She could do this alone. Her grandmother had raised her from nothing, teaching her that strength wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about taking the next right step. But there was still the question of Damien. That evening, Maeve sat in her small studio apartment in Queens, the pregnancy test on her kitchen table like evidence of a crime. She had tried calling him twice, hanging up before the first ring. What would she even say? "Hi, remember me? Your former cleaning lady? Well, surprise, we made a baby." The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent weeks telling herself that their worlds were too different, that anything between them was impossible. Now she carried a piece of him inside her, a connection that couldn't be severed by social barriers or professional boundaries. She picked up her phone a third time, scrolling to his contact information. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a full minute before she set the phone down again. Tomorrow, she decided. She would tell him tomorrow. But tomorrow turned into next week, and next week turned into a month. Every day, Maeve told herself she would make the call. Every night she talked herself out of it. What if he thought she was trying to trap him? What if he accused her of planning this? What if he offered her money to make the problem disappear? By the time she finally worked up the courage, she was 12 weeks along, just beginning to show the smallest curve beneath her scrubs. She had scheduled the call for Thursday evening, after her shift ended, and before she lost her nerve entirely. She never got the chance to make it. "Maeve? Doctor." Henley appeared in the doorway of the supply closet where she was counting inventory. "There's someone here to see you." Her heart stopped. There was only one person who would know where to find her. Only one person who had the resources to track her down when she had been carefully avoiding him. "It's fine," Dr. Henley continued with a knowing smile. "Take your time. I'll finish up here." Maeve walked to the front desk on unsteady legs, her hands instinctively moving to cover her still flat stomach. Damien stood in the waiting room like a figure from another world, his charcoal suit and polished shoes completely out of place among the cheerful pediatric decorations and scattered toys. He looked thinner than she remembered, shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. "Hello, Maeve." "Damien." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you." He glanced around the colorful waiting room, taking in the cartoon characters on the walls and the small chairs designed for children. "Could we talk somewhere private?" Maeve nodded toward a small consultation room, her mind racing. He didn't know about the pregnancy. His surprise at finding her here made that clear. So why had he come? In the privacy of the consultation room, they faced each other across a space that felt both intimate and vast. Damien's eyes searched her face like he was trying to memorize her features. "I tried to forget you," he said quietly. "Threw myself into work. Told myself it was better this way. That we both got what we wanted. Damien. But I can't," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't sleep. Can't concentrate. Everything feels gray without you." The words she had dreamed of hearing, and now they came at the worst possible moment. Maeve felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this man who had turned her world upside down. "It's too late," she whispered. "No, it's not. We can figure this out. I don't care about the differences between us, about what people will think. I just need Damien. I'm pregnant." The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Damien's face went completely blank, all emotion draining away until he looked like a statue carved from marble. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of a future neither had planned. And in that silence, two hearts that had been learning to beat as one suddenly forgot the rhythm entirely. Damien's face transformed from surprise to something harder, more calculating. Maeve watched in real time as the man who had whispered her name in the darkness disappeared, replaced by the cold businessman she had first met in his kitchen months ago. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word falling from his lips like a foreign language he was testing for the first time. 12 weeks, Maeve said quietly, her hands moving instinctively to her stomach. "I know the timing is. How convenient." The words hit her like a physical blow. Maeve stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" Damien's expression was granite, his voice devoid of any warmth she had grown to recognize. "I show up here talking about wanting you back. And suddenly you're carrying my child. Tell me, how long have you been planning this reveal? The accusation hung in the air between them, poisonous and sharp. Maeve felt something vital break inside her chest. Planning? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. You think I planned this? I think timing like this doesn't happen by accident. He straightened his tie with mechanical precision, a gesture she now recognized as his way of armoring himself. I think you saw an opportunity and took it. An opportunity for what exactly? Maeve's voice was growing stronger now, powered by a fury she didn't know she possessed. For 18 years of guaranteed income, for a lifestyle upgrade, for access to a world you could never reach on your own. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep. It's actually quite clever if you think about it. Maeve stood frozen, unable to process the cruelty coming from the mouth that had once kissed her with such tenderness. This wasn't the Damien who had held her during thunderstorms, who had listened to her talk about her grandmother's music collection, who had made her believe that fairy tales might be possible after all. You think I got pregnant on purpose, she said slowly, needing to hear him confirm the unthinkable. I think you're a smart woman who saw an opportunity to change her circumstances. His voice was flat, businesslike, and I think you're probably not the first to try it. The words landed like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the love she had been foolish enough to nurture. Maeve felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. Get out, she said quietly. Maeve, get out! The words erupted from her with a force that surprised them both. Get out of here before I call security. But Damien wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook, the gesture so casual it felt like another slap. Let's be practical about this, he said, clicking his pen with mechanical efficiency. What will it take to make this problem disappear? 50,000, 100? I'm sure there are discrete facilities that can handle this quickly, and Maeve's hand moved before her brain could process the action. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed in the small consultation room like a gunshot. Damien's head snapped to the side, a red handprint blooming across his pale skin. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even shame, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Don't you ever, she said, her voice shaking with rage, ever suggest that I would hurt my child for your convenience? She moved toward the door, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and heartbreak. Before leaving, she turned back to face him one final time. You want to know what I planned, Damien? I planned to tell you about our baby because I thought you deserved to know. I planned to do this alone because I knew someone like you would never want someone like me. But I didn't plan for you to be cruel. Her voice broke on the last word. I didn't plan for you to break my heart twice. Damien opened his mouth as if to speak, but Maeve was already gone, leaving him alone in a room decorated with smiling cartoon animals and inspirational posters about the miracle of childhood. In the parking lot behind the medical office, Maeve finally allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. She sat in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, and let herself mourn not just for the relationship that had died in that room, but for the future she had been foolish enough to imagine. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Her hand shook as she opened it, some treacherous part of her heart hoping it might be an apology. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Wire transfer of $200,000 has been sent to account ending in 4738. Consider this a one-time settlement. No further contact necessary. D. Whitmore. Maeve stared at the message until the words blurred through her tears. He had found her bank information somehow, probably the same way he had found her workplace. Even his apologies came with price tags attached. She deleted the message without replying and drove home through Queens traffic that moved like molasses, each red light giving her more time to replay the scene in the consultation room. By the time she reached her studio apartment, the shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold determination she recognized from her grandmother's voice during the hardest times. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table with a notebook and pen, making lists. Doctor appointments to schedule, baby supplies to research, a budget to create that didn't include blood money from a man who thought love could be purchased and problems could be solved with wire transfers. She would raise this child alone, just as her grandmother had raised her, and she would make sure that her son or daughter never felt like a mistake, never felt unwanted, never felt like a problem to be solved with money. The $200,000 could sit in her account and rot. She would succeed on her own terms, just as she always had. But some wounds, once inflicted, leave scars that last longer than the people who created them. Maeve Hollis stood at the window of the pediatric clinic, watching the autumn rain create rivulets down the glass. 5 years had transformed her in ways both visible and invisible. Her honey-colored hair was now cut in a practical bob. Her hands bore the confident movements of someone who had found her place in the world, and her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there in that consultation room where her heart had shattered. "Mama, look what I drew." She turned to find Luca bouncing toward her desk, a piece of construction paper clutched in his small hands. At 5 years old, he was all elbows and knees and boundless energy, with her storm-gray eyes and hair that caught golden highlights in the afternoon sun. He had inherited her stubborn chin and her grandmother's musical laugh, but sometimes, in the angle of his jaw or the way he tilted his head when concentrating, Maeve caught glimpses of someone else entirely. "Let me see, sweetheart." She knelt to his level, accepting the artwork with the reverence it deserved. The drawing showed 2 stick figures under a rainbow, one tall, one small, both smiling. "Is this us?" "Uh-huh." Luca pointed to the smaller figure. "That's me and that's you, and we're happy because we have each other." Maeve felt her chest tighten with love so fierce it was almost painful. "We do have each other, don't we?" "Mama." Luca's voice grew quieter, the way it always did when he was about to ask the question that haunted their quiet moments. "Why don't I have a daddy like Connor and Aiden?" She had been preparing for this conversation for months, but it never got easier. Maeve pulled Luca into her lap, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes families look different, baby. Some have a mama and a daddy, some have 2 mamas or 2 daddies, and some, like us, have just a mama who loves you more than all the stars in the sky." "But where is my daddy?" Luca persisted with the relentless logic of a 5-year-old. "Everyone has a daddy somewhere." Maeve closed her eyes briefly, choosing her words carefully. "Your daddy is somewhere far away, and that's okay because we have everything we need right here." It wasn't a lie exactly. Damien was far away, not just geographically but emotionally, spiritually, in every way that mattered. She had kept her promise to herself, never touching the money he had sent, building their life through her own determination and the support of people who had become their chosen family. Dr. Henley had promoted her to office manager after 2 years, impressed by her organizational skills and gentle way with anxious parents. They had moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, nothing fancy but clean and safe, with a tiny balcony where Luca could grow tomatoes in plastic pots. "Mrs. Hollis?" Carla appeared in the doorway, using the title Maeve had never corrected. "Your 3 o'clock is here." "Coming," Maeve replied, then turned back to Luca. "Okay, mister. You know the drill. Homework first, then you can play with the building blocks in Dr. Henley's office. Can I have goldfish crackers? After homework." "What about Luca?" She gave him the look that said the negotiation was over. "Homework." He sighed dramatically but settled at the small desk they had set up in the corner of her office. Watching him work with his tongue poking out in concentration, Maeve felt the familiar surge of pride mixed with protective fierceness. This child, their child, was brilliant and kind and funny, completely unaware that he had been unwanted by half of his genetic heritage. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythm of patient files and insurance calls. Luca finished his kindergarten homework with minimal drama and was happily constructing an elaborate city from wooden blocks when Maeve's phone rang. "Pediatric Associates, this is Maeve." "Maeve, it's Janet from PS 108. The voice of Luca's school secretary sent immediate alarm bells ringing. "I need you to come pick up Luca immediately." Maeve's blood turned cold. "Is he hurt? What happened?" "He's not injured, but he left school grounds without permission. We found him about 6 blocks away. And when we asked where he was going, he said he was looking for his father." The words hit Maeve like a physical blow. She glanced at Luca, who was still absorbed in his block construction, blissfully unaware that his innocent question had just turned their carefully constructed world upside down. "I'll be right there," she managed. 20 minutes later, Maeve sat in the principal's office with Luca beside her, his small hand clasped tightly in hers. He looked defiant and scared in equal measure, his chin jutting out the way it did when he was trying not to cry. Luca told his teacher that he found something with his father's name on it. Principal Morrison explained gently. He became quite agitated when she couldn't help him understand what it meant. Maeve's heart sank. She had been so careful to remove every trace of Damien from their lives, but somehow something had slipped through. "What did you find, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Luca reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled business card. Her old employee ID from the cleaning service, the one that listed her assignment to Whitmore Enterprises. She had thought she had thrown it away years ago, but apparently it had been hiding in an old wallet. "It says Whitmore," Luca said solemnly. "And yesterday at Connor's house his daddy was watching the news and there was a man on TV named Whitmore. He looked," Luca struggled for the words, "he looked like he could be my daddy." Maeve felt the ground shift beneath her feet. After 5 years of carefully building a life separate from Damien's world, her son had found him anyway. "Baby," she began, but Luca interrupted. "I want to meet him, Mama. I want to know why he doesn't want me." The simple honesty of the statement broke something inside Maeve's chest. Looking into her son's earnest face, she realized that no amount of protection could shield him from the fundamental questions about his identity. And maybe it was time to stop trying. Because some truths, no matter how painful, have a way of demanding to be faced. Damien Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 42nd floor office, watching the city pulse beneath him like a living organism. 5 years had changed him in ways that weren't immediately visible. The same sharp suits, the same commanding presence, the same empire that continued to grow with ruthless efficiency. But the shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and the way he gripped his coffee cup suggested hands that were no longer entirely steady. The acquisition meeting had ended an hour ago, another successful expansion into the Seattle market. His lawyers were drawing up the contracts, his accountants were calculating projected revenues, and his assistant was already booking flights for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. So why did success taste like ash in his mouth? "Mr. Whitmore?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "There's a situation downstairs. Security is asking for guidance." Damien frowned, pressing the button. "What kind of situation?" "A child, sir. About 5 years old. He somehow got past the front desk and is insisting he needs to see you." Security tried to escort him out, but he started crying and asking for his father. The words hit Damien like a physical blow. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of ceramic and dark liquid. "Sir, are you there?" "Bring him up," Damien said, his voice hoarse. "Now." "Sir, I don't think—" "Bring him up." The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Damien paced his office like a caged animal, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. It couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. Children wandered into office buildings all the time, confused and looking for parents who worked in the towers of Manhattan. But deep in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like recognition was already stirring. The elevator chimed softly, and Damien's assistant appeared with a small boy whose hand was clasped tightly in that of a security guard. The child looked up at Damien with eyes the color of storm clouds, eyes he had seen in dreams and nightmares for 5 years. "Are you Damien Whitmore?" the boy asked with the direct honesty that only children possessed. Damien couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The child standing before him was impossibly, undeniably familiar. Not just the eyes, but the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders straight despite being clearly overwhelmed. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected back 34 years. "I'm Luca," the boy continued when Damien remained silent. "Luca Hollis. And I think you might be my daddy." The words shattered something inside Damien's chest. He sank into his desk chair, staring at this small person who carried half his DNA and all of Maeve's gentle strength. "How did you get here?" Damien managed. "I took the train," Luca said proudly. "Mama taught me about the subway map, but she doesn't know I came here. She's probably really worried." His face crumpled slightly. "I'm gonna be in so much trouble." "Your mother," Damien's voice caught. "How is she?" "She's the best mama in the whole world," Luca said fiercely, his loyalty absolute. "She works really hard and makes me pancakes on Sundays and reads me stories every night. But sometimes she looks sad when she thinks I'm not watching." The simple honesty of the statement was a knife to Damien's heart. "What made you come looking for me?" Luca reached into his small backpack and pulled out the crumpled business card, holding it out like evidence in a trial. "I found this and then I saw you on TV talking about hotels. You have the same last name as the card and you look like—" He tilted his head, studying Damien's face with heartbreaking intensity. "You look like me." Damien took the card with trembling fingers. It was Maeve's old employee ID from the cleaning service, the one that had assigned her to his building. He remembered her carrying it clipped to her uniform, the photo showing her younger face with the same determined expression she wore when she talked about her dreams. "Luca," he said carefully, "does your mother know you're here?" The boy's face fell. No. She thinks I'm at school, but I had to come because... His voice grew small and uncertain. Because I want to know why you don't want me. The question hit Damien like a physical blow. He looked into this child's face, his son's face, and saw a hurt so profound it made his chest ache. "Oh, Luca," he whispered, and before he could stop himself, he was kneeling on the floor in front of the boy. "It's not that I don't want you. I didn't know. I thought..." The explanation died in his throat because there was no way to tell a 5-year-old about the cruelty he had shown, the assumptions he had made, the cowardice that had driven him to push away the only real love he had ever known. "You didn't know about me?" Luca's eyes widened. "Mama said you were far away, but she didn't say you didn't know." Damien felt tears prick his eyes. Tears he hadn't shed since that night 5 years ago, when he had realized what he had lost. "I knew," he said honestly, "but I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of being a daddy. Scared of not being good enough. Scared of..." He struggled for words a child could understand. Scared of loving someone so much it might hurt. Luca considered this with the solemn gravity of someone much older. "That's silly," he said finally. "Love doesn't hurt. Love makes you brave." The simple wisdom from his son's mouth broke the last of Damien's composure. "You're right," he whispered. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Whitmore." Both Damien and Luca turned toward the elevator, where Maeve stood like an avenging angel, her face flushed with panic and fury. She wore scrubs from the clinic and sneakers that squeaked against the marble floor as she rushed toward them. "Luca Benjamin Hollis, you scared me half to death." She dropped to her knees and pulled the boy into a fierce hug. "Don't you ever, ever disappear like that again." "I'm sorry, Mama." Luca mumbled into her shoulder. "I just wanted to meet him." Maeve's eyes met Damien's over their son's head, and he saw 5 years of pain and strength and exhausted determination in that single look. She was thinner than he remembered, but somehow more substantial, as if motherhood had refined her into something stronger and more luminous. "Hello, Damien," she said quietly. "Maeve." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he was coming here. If you had what?" she asked, standing slowly and keeping Luca close to her side. "If you had known, would you have sent him away too?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Damien looked at his son, his brilliant, brave, beautiful son, and felt something shift permanently in his chest. "No," he said firmly. "I would have asked him to stay." And for the first time in 5 years, the truth felt like a beginning, rather than an ending. The ride down to the lobby felt eternal. Luca sat between them in the back of Damien's town car, chattering about the elevator buttons and the view from the 42nd floor, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling between the two adults flanking him. Maeve stared out the window at the Manhattan traffic, her jaw set in the stubborn line Damien remembered all too well. "Can we go get ice cream?" Luca asked suddenly, looking back and forth between them with hopeful eyes. Like a real family? The innocent question hit both adults like a physical blow. Maeve's hand tightened on her purse strap, and Damien felt his chest constrict with a pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. "Sweetheart," Maeve said gently, "Mr. Whitmore probably has important work to do." "Actually," Damien found himself saying, "I think ice cream sounds perfect." Maeve shot him a warning look, but Luca's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You want to have ice cream with us?" "More than anything," Damien said, and was surprised to realize he meant it completely. They ended up at a small parlor in Brooklyn, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. It was the kind of place Damien would never have noticed before. Mismatched chairs, sticky tables, and the best vanilla soft serve in the borough, according to Luca's authoritative opinion. "This is where Mama and I come for special occasions," Luca explained, attacking his cone with the single-minded determination of a 5-year-old. "Like when I lost my first tooth, and when Mama got her promotion, and when I learned to tie my shoes all by myself." Damien watched his son's animated gestures and felt a sharp pang of loss for all the moments he had missed. First steps, first words, first everything, all experienced without him because of his own cowardice and cruelty. "Tell me about your shoes," Damien said seriously, earning a giggle from Luca and a surprised look from Maeve. For the next hour, Luca regaled them with stories from his short but eventful life. His best friend Connor, who had a pet hamster named Speedy. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who let him help feed the classroom fish. The time he tried to cook breakfast for Maeve and almost burned down their kitchen making toast. Damien found himself hanging on every word, memorizing details about this remarkable little person who existed because of one night when walls had come down, and hearts had been brave enough to risk everything. "I need to use the bathroom," Luca announced suddenly, sliding off his chair with the confidence of a regular customer. "It's right back there, sweetheart," Maeve called after him. "Be careful." The moment Luca disappeared around the corner, the easy atmosphere evaporated. Maeve turned to face Damien fully for the first time since the office, and he saw the full force of 5 years' worth of accumulated pain and anger in her storm-gray eyes. "What do you want, Damien?" she asked quietly. "I want to know my son," he said immediately. "I want to be part of his life." "Now you do." Her voice carried no inflection, no emotion, which somehow made it more devastating than if she had screamed. 5 years too late, but now you do. "Maeve, I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more venom than any shout. "You called me a gold digger. You accused me of trapping you. You offered me money to get rid of our child." Each word was a knife thrust, precise and deadly. Damien felt them land with the weight they deserved. "You're right," he said simply. "I was cruel. I was a coward. I was everything you've probably told yourself about me for 5 years. "I've never told myself anything about you," Maeve replied, "because I made a promise to Luca that I would never let your poison touch him. He doesn't know you sent money. He doesn't know you wanted him gone. All he knows is that his father wasn't there, and he spent 5 years wondering if it was because he wasn't good enough." The words hit Damien like a physical blow. "He thinks it's his fault? Children always think it's their fault." Maeve's composure cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your son ask why he doesn't have a daddy, while you're working 3 jobs to keep him fed and housed? Do you know what it's like to see him light up every time he meets another little boy's father, because he's hoping maybe this time someone will want him?" Damien felt tears burning behind his eyes. "Maeve, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give him back 5 years of bedtime stories from his father. Sorry doesn't fill the gap in every Father's Day card he's ever made at school. Sorry doesn't—" Her voice broke, and she pressed her hands to her eyes. "You're right," Damien said quietly. "Sorry doesn't fix anything, but maybe we could try to build something new." For him, Maeve looked up, and he saw the war playing out in her expression. The mother who wanted her son to have everything he deserved, fighting against the woman who had been betrayed too deeply to trust again. "I'm back." Luca's voice rang out cheerfully as he bounded back to their table. "Did you miss me?" "Every second," Maeve said, pulling him into a quick hug. "Daddy missed me too, right?" Luca turned to Damien with such open trust that it nearly broke him. "More than you could possibly know," Damien whispered. Luca beamed and climbed back into his chair. "So are we gonna do this again? Like, have ice cream and talk and stuff?" Damien looked at Maeve, silently asking permission he had no right to request. After a long moment, she gave the smallest of nods. "I'd like that very much," he said. "Good." Luca clapped his hands together. "Because Connor says families are supposed to spend time together, and now we're kind of like a family, right?" The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with implications. None of them were ready to fully explore. "We're something," Maeve said carefully. "We'll figure out what that means as we go." Damien felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The chance to prove he could be more than the man who had driven them away with his fear and cruelty. "Can I ask you something, Daddy?" Luca's voice was suddenly smaller, more uncertain. "Anything. Are you going to leave again?" The question pierced straight through to Damien's soul. He looked into his son's eyes and saw the careful hope of a child who had learned too early that adults sometimes disappeared without explanation. "No," he said firmly. "I'm going to stay right here in New York, and I'm going to see you as much as your mama says is okay, and I'm going to try every single day to be the kind of father you deserve." Luca studied his face with the intensity of someone much older, as if trying to gauge the truth of the promise. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said simply. "But if you're gonna be my daddy, you have to learn the rules." "What rules?" "No lying, no yelling, and you have to give really good hugs." Luca ticked them off on his small fingers. "And you have to love Mama too, because she's the best person in the whole world and she deserves to be happy." The last rule hit both adults like a lightning bolt. Maeve's face flushed, and Damien felt his heart stop entirely. "Luca," Maeve said quickly, "that's not how—" "It's okay, Mama," Luca interrupted with the wisdom of someone who saw the world in simple, clear terms. "I know grown-up love is complicated, but maybe you could try being friends first." And in that moment, a 5-year-old boy accomplished what years of therapy and self-reflection had failed to do. He showed two broken adults that healing was possible, one small step at a time. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book neither Damien nor Maeve was sure they wanted to finish reading. What began as awkward, supervised visits in neutral locations slowly evolved into something that resembled the early stages of trust. Damien showed up when he said he would. He listened when Luca talked about his day. He learned the difference between goldfish crackers and cheese crackers, discovered that his son was left-handed like him, and memorized the complicated rules of an elaborate superhero game that seemed to change every week. Most importantly, he never once mentioned money, custody, or lawyers. On a snowy Saturday in December, Damien found himself in the unlikely position of sitting cross-legged on the floor of Maeve's small apartment in Astoria, helping Luca build an elaborate fortress out of couch cushions and blankets. The space was nothing like his Manhattan penthouse, tiny, cluttered with the detritus of daily life, warm in a way that had nothing to do with expensive heating systems. "The dragons can't get us in here," Luca announced solemnly, adjusting a pillow that served as the fortress wall. "This is our safe place." "Good thinking," Damien said seriously. "What about the entrance? We need to be able to get in and out, but keep the bad guys away." "Mama," Luca called toward the kitchen. "Daddy wants to know about fortress strategy." The word, "daddy," still hit Damien like a physical blow every time he heard it. 3 months, and he still wasn't used to the casual way Luca had integrated him into their small family unit, as if he had always been there. Maeve appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had been making hot chocolate for their Saturday afternoon tradition, another ritual that had evolved naturally without anyone formally deciding it should exist. "Fortress strategy is very important," she said gravely, earning a giggle from Luca. "You need multiple escape routes and a secret password." "What's our password?" Luca asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. "How about family?" Damien suggested quietly, not looking at Maeve as he said it. "Perfect." Luca clapped his hands. "Our password is family, because that's what we are now, right?" The question hung in the air like a challenge neither adult was quite ready to accept. Maeve's eyes met Damien's over their son's head, and he saw the familiar war playing out in her expression, the part of her that wanted to believe fighting against the part that remembered too much pain. "We're something special," she said finally, which was the closest she had come to acknowledging the subtle shift that had been happening over the past few weeks. The afternoon progressed with the comfortable chaos that Damien was learning to associate with life in the Hollis household. Luca spilled hot chocolate on the couch. They played 17 rounds of a card game with rules that seemed to change mid-hand, and somehow Damien found himself being recruited to help make dinner. "I'm not much of a cook," he warned as Maeve handed him a cutting board and a knife. "It's just spaghetti," she said with a small smile. "Even billionaires can handle pasta." They worked in companionable silence, their movements gradually synchronizing in the small kitchen. When Maeve reached across him for the oregano, her arm brushed his, and he felt the familiar electricity that had never really gone away. She seemed to feel it too, because she paused for just a moment, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Damien," she said quietly so Luca couldn't hear from his perch at the kitchen table, "I need to ask you something. Anything. The money you sent 5 years ago." Her voice was careful, measured. "It's still sitting in my account. I never touched it." Damien felt his stomach drop. "Maeve, I never expected—" "I know, but I want you to take it back." "What?" "No, I can't." "Yes, you can." She turned to face him fully, and he saw determination in her storm-gray eyes. "I need you to take it back because as long as it's there, it feels like a debt, like something hanging over us, and if we're going to—" She paused, struggling with the words. "If we're going to try to build something real here, I need a clean slate." The words, "something real," hit him like a lightning bolt. "Are we? Building something real?" Before Maeve could answer, Luca's voice piped up from the table. "Are you guys talking about grown-up stuff again?" "Maybe a little," Maeve admitted, moving to ruffle his hair. "Are you talking about how you look at each other different now?" Luca asked with the devastating honesty of a 5-year-old. Both adults froze. "What do you mean?" Damien asked carefully. "Well, before you looked at Mama like she was sad and you were sad too. But now you look at her like Connor's daddy looks at Connor's mama. All gooey and happy." Maeve's face flushed deep red. "Luca Benjamin, it's okay, Mama. I like it when you look happy." Luca swung his legs under the table. "And I like having a daddy who knows how to build forts and doesn't get mad when I spill stuff." Damien felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away for 5 years. "I like being your daddy," he said quietly, "more than I've ever liked anything in my life." "Good," Luca said matter-of-factly, "because you're stuck with us now." Later that evening, after dinner and bath time and 3 stories read in silly voices, Luca finally succumbed to sleep. Damien stood in the doorway of the small bedroom, watching his son's peaceful face in the glow of a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "He's everything," Maeve replied softly from beside him. "My whole world." They moved to the living room, settling on opposite ends of the couch with careful space between them. But the air felt charged with possibility, heavy with words that had been building for months. "I need to tell you something," Damien said finally. "About that night 5 years ago. About what I said to you. Damien, we don't have to." "Yes, we do." He turned to face her fully. "I was terrified. Not of you, not of being a father, but of needing someone so much that losing them would destroy me. My parents, they taught me that love was a weapon people used against you, that caring was weakness, that the only safe way to live was alone." Maeve was quiet, listening with the same patience she showed Luca when he was working through a difficult problem. "When you told me you were pregnant, it wasn't you I was rejecting. It was the possibility of having something real to lose. Something that mattered more than my empire or my reputation or any of the things I thought defined me." His voice broke slightly. "I chose fear over love, and I've regretted it every single day since." "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked softly. "Because I want you to know that the man who said those cruel things to you, he was a coward. But the man sitting here now, the one who's learned what it means to hear his son laugh, who's discovered that home isn't a place but a feeling." He reached for her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. This man would choose love every time. Maeve studied their joined hands, her thumb tracing patterns on his skin. "It's not that simple, Damien. We can't just pretend the past 5 years didn't happen. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that people can change, that maybe we could build something new from the pieces of what we broke." She was quiet for so long that Damien wondered if he had pushed too hard, asked for too much. Then she looked up at him with eyes that held tears and hope in equal measure. "I loved you," she whispered. "5 years ago I loved you so much it scared me, and when you pushed me away, it nearly broke me. I know. I'm so sorry. But watching you with Luca these past few months, seeing how you've fought to earn his trust, how you've shown up even when it was hard." She took a shaky breath. "I think maybe I could learn to love you again, if you're willing to be patient, if you're willing to prove that this time is different." Damien felt tears slip down his cheeks. "I have the rest of my life to prove it to you." "Good," she said, echoing their son's earlier pronouncement. "Because we're not easy to love, Luca and I. We're stubborn and set in our ways, and we come as a package deal. I wouldn't want you any other way." Slowly, carefully, like they were both afraid the moment might shatter, Damien leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, nothing like the desperate passion they had shared 5 years ago. This was something new, a promise instead of a goodbye, a beginning instead of an ending. When they broke apart, Maeve rested her forehead against his. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we take it one day at a time. We build trust. We learn how to be a family." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "And we let a very wise 5-year-old teach us that love doesn't have to be complicated." Outside, snow continued to fall on the city, blanketing everything in pristine white. Inside a small apartment in Astoria, 3 hearts that had been fractured were slowly learning to beat as one. And for the first time in 5 years, the future felt not like a sentence to be served, but like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. 2 years later, love is not a destination. It's a daily choice to show up, to stay, to build something beautiful from the ordinary moments that make a life. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the brownstone in Park Slope, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors that still smelled faintly of fresh paint. Maeve stood at the counter, her hair now shoulder-length and streaked with honey highlights, humming softly as she packed lunch into a Spider-Man backpack that had seen better days. "Luca, 5 minutes!" she called toward the stairs, her voice carrying the easy authority of 2 more years of motherhood under her belt. "I can't find my library book," came the muffled reply from the second floor. "Check under your bed." Damien's voice joined the morning chaos as he descended the stairs, adjusting his tie with one hand while carrying a small pink backpack in the other. And don't forget your science project. It's right here, Daddy. 7-year-old Luca appeared at the top of the stairs holding a carefully constructed volcano with obvious pride. Mrs. Chen says mine is going to be the best eruption in the whole second grade. Maeve and Damien exchanged amused glances over their son's boundless confidence. Some things never changed. Luca still approached life with the unshakable belief that everything would work out exactly as it should. Morning, beautiful, Damien murmured as he reached the kitchen, pressing a soft kiss to Maeve's temple. The gesture was so natural, so unconsciously intimate, that it still sometimes took her breath away to realize this was her life now. Morning yourself, handsome. She turned in his arms, straightening his tie with practiced efficiency. Big presentation today? The biggest. He grinned, and she saw traces of the old nervous energy that used to consume him before important business meetings. But now it was tempered with something else. The steady confidence of a man who knew that his worth wasn't measured solely by quarterly reports and acquisition deals. But first, I have a more important job. As if summoned by his words, the patter of small feet on stairs announced the arrival of their other morning ritual. 3-year-old Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark curls wild from sleep and her storm-gray eyes, so like her mother's, bright with the prospect of a new day. "Daddy, up!" she demanded, raising her arms with the imperious confidence of someone who had never doubted she would be lifted, held, cherished. Damien swept her into his arms without hesitation, spinning her around until she dissolved into giggles that filled the kitchen like music. "There's my princess. Did you sleep well?" "I dreamed about ponies," Emma announced solemnly. "Pink ones with purple manes. And they could fly." "Flying ponies are the best kind," Damien agreed with complete seriousness, earning another giggle from his daughter and a warm smile from his wife. Wife. Even after 8 months of marriage, the word still sent a small thrill through Maeve's chest. Not because she needed the legal validation, they had been a family long before the ceremony, but because of what it represented, a choice, made daily, to build something lasting from the fragile trust they had carefully cultivated. The wedding had been small, held in the garden of the house they now called home. Luca had served as ring-bearer with Dr. Henley officiating, and Emma had toddled down the aisle in a tiny white dress, more interested in the flower petals than the ceremony itself. It had been perfect in its imperfection, exactly what they had needed. "Mama, I found it!" Luca bounded into the kitchen, library book in hand. It was under Emma's crib. She must have taken it for nap-time reading again. "Emma doesn't read yet, sweetheart," Maeve said gently, though she had her suspicions about her precocious daughter's bedtime habits. "She looks at the pictures really hard," Luca insisted with the protective loyalty that had defined his relationship with his little sister from the moment she was born. "That's almost the same thing." "Pictures are important," Damien agreed, settling Emma into her high chair and beginning the complicated process of preparing her breakfast. 2 years of practice had made him surprisingly adept at negotiations with a toddler who had inherited both parents' stubborn streak. Maeve watched this morning choreography, the easy way Damien anticipated Emma's needs, how Luca automatically helped gather school supplies, the unconscious teamwork that had developed between her and the man she had once thought she would never see again, and felt the familiar flutter of gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed her. It hadn't been easy, those first months of rebuilding. There had been arguments about discipline and bedtimes, awkward conversations about expectations and boundaries, moments when the weight of their history threatened to crush the fragile new thing they were creating. But they had pushed through, committed to the messy, imperfect work of becoming a family. Damien had sold the Manhattan penthouse and moved to a modest apartment in Queens to be closer to them. He had learned to grocery shop and attend parent-teacher conferences, to comfort nightmares and celebrate small victories. He had shown up, consistently and without fanfare, until showing up became as natural as breathing. And somewhere in the dailiness of it all, the shared school pickups and bedtime stories, the weekend pancakes and evening baths, Maeve had found herself falling in love all over again. Not with the dangerous stranger who had once made her heart race in midnight kitchens, but with the man who remembered which stuffed animal Emma needed for comfort, who never missed Luca's baseball games, who still made her coffee exactly the way she liked it every single morning. "All right, Whitmore family," Damien announced, using the name that still made Luca beam with pride. "Time for school and work and all the important business of living." The next 20 minutes passed in the controlled chaos of a family morning. Backpacks were gathered, shoes were located, faces were wiped clean of breakfast remnants, Emma was deposited at daycare with her beloved teacher, Miss Sarah. Luca was delivered to PS 321 with promises that Daddy would pick him up for their weekly ice cream date. And finally, Damien and Maeve found themselves alone in the car during the brief drive to her office. "You know," Maeve said, reaching over to take his hand, "I never thanked you properly for yesterday." "What about yesterday?" Damien asked, though his smile suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "The PTA meeting, when Mrs. Patterson made that comment about unconventional families, and you stood up and gave that whole speech about how love makes a family, not DNA or timing or social expectations." She squeezed his fingers. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His voice was firm. "No one gets to make our children feel like they're less than perfect because their parents took the long way to finding each other." They had pulled up outside the clinic where Maeve now worked as the office manager, the same place where she had first learned she was pregnant with Emma. But instead of getting out immediately, they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked across the center console. "I have something to tell you," Maeve said suddenly, her voice carrying a nervous energy that made Damien turn to look at her fully. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something, I think. I hope." She took a deep breath. "Dr. Henley offered me a partnership in the practice. She wants to expand into family counseling, and she thinks my psychology background would be perfect for it." Damien's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that still surprised her after all this time. "Maeve, that's incredible. You'd be amazing at that. It would mean going back to school part-time, finishing my degree, getting certified in family therapy." She bit her lip. "It would be a lot of work, a lot of evening classes and weekend studying. The kids would need more help with—" "Hey," Damien reached over to cup her face gently. "Remember what a very wise 5-year-old once told us? Love makes you brave, and we're a team now. Whatever you need to chase your dreams, we'll figure it out together." The simple faith in his voice, the absolute certainty that they could handle whatever challenges came their way, still had the power to take her breath away. This was what she had been too young and too scared to understand 7 years ago. That real love wasn't about passion and intensity, though those had their place. Real love was about partnership, about showing up for the mundane moments and the difficult ones with equal commitment. "I love you," she said, the words still carrying the weight of miracle even after 2 years of saying them daily. "I love you too." He leaned across the console to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promises. "Now go save the world, Dr. Whitmore." As Maeve walked into the clinic, she turned back to wave at Damien through the car window. He blew her a kiss, a gesture that would have seemed impossibly cheesy from anyone else but felt perfect coming from the man who had learned to love her through actions rather than just words. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the 4 of them in their dining room with its mismatched chairs and walls covered in Luca's artwork and Emma's finger paintings, Maeve looked at the life they had built and felt the deep satisfaction of dreams realized in ways she never could have imagined. "Daddy," Luca said suddenly, looking up from his mac and cheese, "remember when I asked you if you were going to leave again?" "I remember," Damien said carefully. "Well, you didn't. You stayed, just like you promised. And now we have Emma in this house and Mama smiles all the time." Luca's expression grew serious. "I'm glad I went to find you that day." "Me too, buddy. Best thing that ever happened to me." "The best thing that ever happened to all of us," Maeve corrected gently, reaching across the table to squeeze both Damien's hand and Luca's. Later, after the dishes were done and the children were tucked into their beds, Damien and Maeve curled up together on the couch in their living room. The walls were covered with family photos now, candid shots of birthday parties and holiday mornings, formal portraits from their wedding day, everyday moments captured and preserved. "No regrets?" Damien asked quietly, his arms tightening around her as they watched the evening news with half attention. "About what?" "Any of it. The long way we took to get here, the years we lost, the pain we caused each other." Maeve was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I used to think that if we had done things differently, if you hadn't been scared, if I had been more patient, we could have avoided all the heartache. And now? Now I think maybe we needed to break before we could learn how to be whole together. Maybe we had to lose each other to understand what we had found." She tilted her head to look at him. "The people we were 7 years ago? I don't think they could have built this. But the people we became because of all that pain and growth, we make a pretty good team." "The best team," Damien agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Outside their window, the Brooklyn evening settled into comfortable darkness. Inside, a family that had been fractured and rebuilt sat together in the quiet contentment of love that had been tested and emerged stronger. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just beginnings in disguise, and sometimes the longest way home is the only way that teaches you what home really means. What would you have done if you were in Maeve's shoes? Would you have had the courage to love someone who had once broken your heart so completely? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.